When Harold Macmillan assumed as Prime Minister, Britain inspired a mood quite similar to the Edwardian style, which was relaxed and confidence.
I love these lazy Saturdays.
He visited the USA and the USSR and must sustain the idea of the country of great power which was suffering a cultural achievement in fashion, popular music, and fiction.
Look.
However, the real situation was that by the 1960s, Britain went through an economic decline which could not be ignored.
After plunging 75 points this morning,
Oh, I hope plunging means up and 75 means 200.
the firm
The two political parties began to lose support from society and the focus was put on the resurgent Liberal Party, to the nationalist parties in Scotland and Wales. They were an extreme right-wing organization campaigning against Commonwealth immigration. After the empire's disappearance, Britain started to consider an alternative role, but they were not convinced to join the EEC, the European Economic Community. During 1950, Britain obtained a rapid rise in living standards of annual average growth of 2.2% as a consequence of insecure foundations. The wage increases of workers and trade unions were lower than the productivity of improvement. It caused an inflation problem on the balance of payments.
Ooh, that's bad.
The pound suffered an inevitable devaluation. The only solution was deflationary measures which were designed to check domestic consumption.
Ooh, that's bad.
However, the Chancellor applied a complete freeze on pay increases in 1961.
That's good.
But the following year, the previous decision caused the discharge of the Prime Minister with one-third of his cabinet. The following Chancellor committed the same mistake when he began expansionist policies.
That's bad.
Labour Party suffered from three successive defeats, one in 1951, the other in 1955, and the last one in 1959. Those resulted in a crisis of confidence in British socialism. In the publication of The Future of the Socialism by Anthony Crosland, it is argued that socialism in the form of the state ownership of industry should go no further. The party remained committed to socialism, and its steady fall in votes suggested that the party was being shattered by fundamental social changes, as for example working classes prosperity seemed to have led many voters to identify with middle-class aspirations like home ownership. The Labour Party was rescued from its dilemma because of the collapse of the Conservative support after 1961 and the election of a new leader, Harold Wilson, who managed to suppress ideological divisions in the party, even exploiting Macmillan's difficulties. He appealed to middle classes. After 13 years of Conservative government, the Labour Party took place again with Wilson on the head.
That's good.
The Prime Minister devoted himself to short-term political survival rather than to substantive problems the country faced. Wilson inherited a balance of payments deficits from the Conservatives, but Wilson and his colleagues proved to be more conservatives rather than the modernizers they were believed to be.
Power! But speeches are for campaigning. Now is the time for action.
The policy they soon adopted was a deflationary one in order to dampen speculation against the pound, but the effects of raising the bank rate, increasing taxation, and restricting imports were supposed to kill the prospects of fast economic growth, in which the labor social policy depended.
Ooh, that's bad.
The alternative was the devaluation of the currency in order to restore the competitiveness of exports and stimulate output. But in 1949, Labor's experience of devaluation made him avoid this experience.
Good.
In order to defend the value of the pound, the Prime Minister required American cooperation. President Johnson agreed on the need to avoid the British devaluation. In return for his support, he insisted that Britain should maintain her costly and anachronistic defense role in the Far East and support the Americans in their war against communism in Vietnam.
That's bad.
Can I go now?
Wilson accepted. Britain avoided any direct military involvement in Vietnam.
Okay, who wants a piece of me?
Through this, in 1966, Wilson managed to win a second election. Nevertheless, he surrendered control over the British economic policy.
Go activists! We give you our power!
By 1967, the trade deficit got worse, forcing the cabinet to reconsider if the currency was overvalued. By November, a devaluation took place, and at the same time the decision of withdraw an imperial defense role and apply once again to the EEZ. Later on, a new dose of deflation improved the balance of payments, but the cost was the economic growth.
What did it cost?
Everything.
Between 1964 and 1970, the output only increased by 2.7% by year. Britain remained below the rest of Western Europe average. By the end of the 1960s, Wilson's government failures generated a wide-ranging political revolt. Within these revolts, we had the upsurge of nationalism in Wales and Scotland. Indeed, the prolonged decline of heavy industry in Wales and Scotland, and also the perceived neglect by London-based governments of both parties, made people get to the idea that the devolution of power to the regions seems attractive. It resulted on Labour Party losing by elections to the new two nationalist parties in 1966 and 1967. Both parties, the Labour and the Conservative, came to the idea of accepting that the confidence on long term about the United Kingdom was lost. As regards external affairs, the Labour Party faced the pressure from the campaign for the nuclear disarmament, and many of his own members were active in order to keep up Britain's claim to an independent nuclear weapon. Wilson flatly refused. Later on, the energies put on that campaign diverted into an attempt to reverse the British government's support for the American policy in Vietnam.
I was prepared to cajole to get what I want. I'm now threatened. Each of you will clear out his nuclear closet immediately. Failure to participate.
Young, well-educated middle-class people were horrified by the bombing of Vietnam and disillusioned by Wilson's failure to recognize the moral case against it. This resulted on the demoralization of its most idealistic supporters. The government also failed to achieve reforms of Britain's political institutions, no changes on the working of parliament and civil services, even though it had been largely discussed. The government also failed to achieve reforms of Britain's political institutions, no changes on the working of parliament and civil services, even though it had been largely discussed. The most damaging thing was the abortive attempt to modernize the trade unions in 1968 and 69. The public blamed the trade unions for Britain's economic problems, and when a bill was drawn, Wilson backed down in the face of opposition from union leaders and some cabinet colleagues. His humiliation retreat symbolized the dilemma of a government unable to control their policies. As a result, Labour Party lost the elections on 1970. The consensus cracks. The inability of the Labour government to check Britain's economic decline between 1964 and 1970 was a disillusioning experience, but when it happened again with a new successor, the whole political system and economic thinking was questioned.
I expect nothing, and I'm still let down.
The new Prime Minister had, from the Conservatives, aroused expectations that was unable to fulfill. He was committed to full employment and social welfare. He believed in the cause of Europe. The unemployment rate rose towards 1 million. The Chancellor attempted to stimulate the economy into rapid growth. Soon, employers conceded wage rises of 15%, but inflation accelerated and the trade gap widened. And he showed unwilling to allow the free market to destroy vital British industries. He offered subsidies, and in 1971 he nationalized the Rolls-Royce.
Yo no manejo el rating, yo manejo un Rolls Royce.
He acquired a reputation for inflexibility. His Industrial Relations Act restricted the trade unions' ability to hold strikes, and the unions reacted furiously. The most challenging union was the National Union of Mine Workers, which used a system of coordinated pickets to stop the movement of coal in 1972. The miners rejected a wage increase of the 8%, and later on they got a 21% increase in 1973. Another rejection of wage increase led Heath to declare a state of emergency and imposed a 3-day working week upon industry. And the industrial problem turned into a political crisis. The unions virtually opposed the government to govern.
¿Dónde están nuestros cheques, imbécil? Mis hombres no trabajarán un minuto más hasta que se les pague.
¿Aceptarían efectivo?
Claro que sí.
¿Escuché abrirse un maletín?
As a consequence, a general election was required by the Prime Minister's advisors because they suspect that the voters were antagonized by the overbearing behavior of the unions and they will support the government.
Elección, 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 elección.
Heath accepted to hold an election at the end of February 1974. The electorate had become disillusioned with both the major parties. The Liberals won a fifth of the votes and social support was not seen since 1929. The discovery of oil helped to support the idea of the Scottish National Party, implying that an independent Scotland will be economically feasible. The Liberal and Nationalist parties terminated the era of two-party dominance in British politics. The election destroyed the government of Heath and supported the Labour Party until 1979. The Conservative Party had an opportunity and It was led by Sir Keith Joseph and later by Margaret Thatcher. In February 1975, she received support from MPs because they only wanted to punish Heath. Her victory dealt a fatal blow to the politics of consensus.